I am so excited to have Ravi with us. He spent the day with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Glenn.
Talking a little bit about stories, and I wanted to spend half hour with you on the importance of stories, imagination, vision, why there is suffering, and the importance of pivot points and recognizing them in your own life. So let's start with stories.
You know, it's interesting, Glenn, when we are very young, what is it that attracts us to listening? It's a story. Children learn through stories. It is only as we get older and older that we somehow replace the story and end up thinking that we can just deal with issues propositionally. As a speaker, as a writer, I always believe philosophy comes at three levels. It comes at the level of argument, it comes at the level of story, and it comes at the level of application. And the truth of the matter is that while reason may come in through the front door, the story comes in through the back door of the imagination. And oftentimes, if it's unguarded and the story is not a right kind of a story with the right kind of implication, then the application is false. So we argue at level one, but we must illustrate it at level two. The 1960s existentialist writers, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, the big boys of French existential philosophy, they understood this. They knew if they were going to win the university student of that day, they had to do it through novels, through drama, through plays. And that's exactly what they did, you know, with The Stranger and or the No Exit and so on. The story is a vital part of learning. That's why the gospel is called the gospel story.
It is. We have lost it. We're going to tell a story tomorrow. Set the story back in its rightful place. A little bit of Johnny Appleseed. He was called Good News Johnny. He told Bible stories. That's all been washed away. The guy who really kind of washed it away, did so much good, however, was Walt Disney. I mean, he kind of made it into, you know, Johnny Appleseed. But we don't have any Disneys anymore. We don't have, if Disney wouldn't have existed, I think we would have fallen a lot earlier, because he helped embed some of those stories and make us remember what America used to feel like on Main Street.
You know, I was telling some folks earlier that I don't know whether this is true or not, but if it is not, it ought to be true. But I was told by a very authentic source, and he personally told it to me, that Billy Graham was visiting, I don't know whether it's Disneyland or Disney World, and talking to Walt Disney.
Disneyland.
And as he was leaving, he said to Walt Disney, "It's a beautiful world of imagination you have created out here." And Walt Disney supposedly said to him, no, this is the real world. When you walk out of here, you're going to walk out into the world of imagination. And having been there and taken my children there, from It's a Small World After All, the music, the beauty, the faces of children, the food, the fun, the laughter. It was G.K. Chesterton who said, here's this brilliant architect with words. And Chesterton said he learned more from observing children than he ever did in his schools, in his studies in philosophy. And what is it a child is really wrapped up with? But tell me a story. And when you're telling them that story, those eyes go wide, and the splendor and the enchantment, all is present. And that loss of wonder in our times is one of the greatest losses we have had. It's going to be the master storyteller who's going to bring back that sense of wonder with truth.
So tell me how we got here. Tell me, you look over the decades. How did we get here? Because I said to you on the air today, when we were on radio, there's not a lot of people that make me feel like an idiot. I feel like an idiot listening to you. It's like, and I said to some friends who were here, I said, on the air, I said, no, wait a minute, say that again. You know, for the dummies out there, I completely understand. I have no clue sometimes. I have to listen to you. We're not used to actually stopping and thinking anymore. We're barely at the story level. How did we get here?
You know, there was some words we were talking about earlier about I don't know who wrote this, but it's pretty clear. He said this: in the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs, cars, and lyrics and music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was a decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. And this is key. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words beginning with self, self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. It made for a lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about love, and few had the nerve to tell them that there was indeed a difference. Down that sliding path, we ultimately lost reason itself. Now, here's the way I look at it, Glenn, and it's important we understand it. I think it was Simone Weil who said, in reality, nothing is so beautiful as the good, nothing so monotonous and boring as evil. But with our imagination, it's the other way around. Fictional good is boring and flat. Fictional evil is varied, intriguing, attractive, and full of charm. Now think about that. What happened when the eye gate became the primary means of dissemination, all right? It used to be where you were reasoning things through. Then pictures took over, and the pictures are assaulting the imagination. What happened with the mass production gurus, they harnessed evil, which is in imagination more varied, intriguing, attractive, and full of charm, but in reality is monotonous and boring and debilitating. So what is left for this generation is to find its brilliant thinkers to retake the good and make good to be what it really is: varied, intriguing, attractive, and full of charm.
That's really, I have to tell you, I've given up on a lot of modern day stories because you just can't. They always make the bad guys good, and the good guys are kind of good. You know what I mean? Everything's just marginal or really bad. And I've been watching some old shows with my kids, old movies, and I've been trying to teach them, see, this is what happens. You know, the bad guys always turn on each other. And that's the way real life really is. The bad guys aren't, well, we're bad guys, and so we're all going to be bad guys together, and I've got loyalty to you. You know what I mean? But that's the way it looks in today's media. You can't teach it. How is a parent able to teach things without the society? I mean, we don't have the Bible anymore. Only Bible thumpers are listening to the Bible. We don't have morals that we agree on. Hollywood and everyone else lifts up darkness, pushes down light. How do we make it?
Brilliant connection. And let me share this. One of my favorite writers is G.K. Chesterton. And to the listening audience, if you haven't read Chesterton, you have picked your own pockets. Brilliant stater of truth. And Chesterton gives this. Let me a minute to explain it. I used to use it in the early days of my preaching. Chesterton says, if you're telling a fairy story to, say, a 1 or 2 year old, and you tell them, and little Tommy got up and walked up to the door. The 2-year-old will, go like this. You take that another 2 years down, 5 years old, or 4 or 5, and you say, little Tommy got up and walked up to the door and opened the door. The 5-year-old is going to go like this. Go another 7 or 8 years, 2, 3 years down the line. Tommy got up, walked up to the door, opened the door, and a dragon jumped in front of him. Here's the point Chesterton makes. The older you get, the more it takes to fill your heart with wonder. For the 2-year-old, it was a big deal to walk up to the door. For the 5-year-old, you had to open the door. For the 8-year-old, you needed the dragon. Now, here's the point Chesterton makes. Only God is big enough to give you that perpetual novelty and restore that sense of wonder. So your juxtaposing of the question with the story and imagination and the loss of the pristine nature of it to the very nature of God and the place of God in our lives, there's a connection, Glenn. The more you lose the ultimate source of wonder, that is God Himself, you will lose wonder in bite-sized portions too. And the days of Tolkien and Lewis and MacDonald and all are soon becoming something so far from the past. Now we need the blood and the orgies of sadomasochism or whatever it is to get people to sit and listen. At the end of it, all we have done is piled evil upon evil and left that beautiful imagination unstacked or unstocked.
How concerned are you about where we're at?
There are two sides to it. I've been an itinerant and a writer now, Glenn, for 4 decades. I've seen so much. Ironically, when I was in my 20s, I was in Vietnam as working with the chaplains. I saw the horrors of what was happening then. And so if you ask me when it all began to change, I think the 60s generation started to change. They then became the professors and the assault began. I'm very concerned. But I also believe that there is always hope, because when I see lives transformed in the kind of work we do, as I'm sure you see it in the dissemination of information, if a life is dramatically changed, Glenn, you begin to see the ripple effect of that one life. What did Jesus do? He found a half a dozen or a dozen of them and changed the known world of his time. And it was no better than our day. If you see what Rome was up to at that point with the gladiatorial fights and all of that, and Greek with its loss of values and virtue, Babylon had come and gone, all of these empires, and Jesus came and planted the seed of a new birth, the transformation of a life. And we can experience that life because he doesn't only change what you do, he changes what you want to do. And I have hope with that message that it can be done.
You're making me, I want to go someplace here I didn't plan on going, but it made me think of something that part of me says it's almost too late for people my age. Get to the kids, because if we don't reignite the imagination of even those under 30, if we don't get them, because they're still adrift, some of them, especially younger kids, still adrift a little bit, have a chance. And I think this generation, the coming generation, is amazing. I think they are truly amazing. They get it, but because there's nobody like you that is saying, fix reason firmly in her seat. Here it is. Boom, boom, boom. And teaching critical thinking. There's no storyteller that reaffirms those truths. They're going to be lost. They're going to be lost.
This is where I think you serve a purpose. Our callings serve a purpose. In a sense, it's a weighty responsibility to carry. It's a burdensome thing. I'm now in my 60s, and I've been doing this for 4 decades. What I've noticed, Glenn, is that the primary measurement in our audience now is the young men and women coming, the young people coming. I'm speaking to you just a few days after being at the Air Force Academy. Mm-hmm. Even though the time had come for the roll call, there were students standing around asking their questions. Yeah. One young man looked at me, and I was trying to figure out his question. He said, "How do you learn?" I thought he was going to say something else.
Just how do you learn?
Yeah, I said, exactly. Mm-hmm. That was his question. Mm-hmm. How do you learn? Here's a senior.
They're not teaching it.
No, they're not. And he said to me, how do we get to where you have gotten to at this stage in life? What steps are needed? And, parents play a pivotal role here. If parents will take up this call, like in the book of Nehemiah, he was told to look out for their families. If dads and moms will be there to tell the story, sustain it with argument, apply it around the kitchen table, give them the heroes that they must find worthy of emulation. If that happens, history can change, the future can be altered. So as daunting as it seems, to be honest with you, there are times I want to give up hope, but I go back to some countries and see the change in the lives of young men and women, and even sometimes political leadership will call you into private and tell you they really don't have any answers. What has to die in our political leadership and in our professorial ranks is hubris. Pride has to die. That sense of self-aggrandizement and arrogance, if that dies, humility comes in, and that's when you become teachable.
It is our primary problem, and no one talks about it. It is the primary problem in our life, in our money system, in our businesses, in our churches. Everything is, I have the answer. I was born this way. I'm entitled to this. We're moving forward. Instead of quiet for a second. Yeah. I've been responding on Facebook. I've been trying to connect with people that are different walks of life, different beliefs. And you get this much more than I do, I'm sure. Just people just bashing you because they just lash out because of something you've said, for one reason or another, and usually on all sides. But what I've started to do, instead of defending myself, I've started to say, A, I love you, and B, what happened today? What happened today? What happened? What's going on right now? And I will tell you, about 80%, I'll get a response back. I am so sorry. You're exactly right. And something was going on. We're just in this mode of bashing, and if we as a country and as individuals would just start to say, wait. It's okay. How can I help you? And we become servants instead of masters. We'd fix most of our problems, would we not?
A few years ago, I was in Damascus, and I was the chief of intelligence. And they were there to tell me, they brought me into the office to tell me they knew I was there. I'll never forget what he said to me: stay out of the politics of the region. I said, I will, sir, but may I ask you one question? I will stay out of it. Can you tell me what's going on here? This is about 5 years ago, Glenn. And here's what he said to me: within 5 years, this whole place is going to blow up. Within 5 years, the whole place is going to blow up. He said, mark my words. He was one of the first to be assassinated. Now, immediately from there, I went to Jordan, and I asked Prince Raad, who's the last heir to the throne of Iraq, what do you want me to take away as the most important need in the region? He said, the same that is in the region all over the world. He said, youth and leadership. Youth and leadership. Leaders that are worth watching, whose character is strong and worth emulating, and young people that have models to look to. We don't have them today. All we have is dictatorial tendencies of somebody who wants to tell you, or he or she wants to tell you how to live. We become unteachable. And until we allow God to be God and stop playing God, we will end up with the same mess that was made at Eden, when we decided to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which means we defined good and evil. And since that day, what's happened now? All trees are protected except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Morality is up for grabs. And so the environment, as important as it is, and we are stewards of it, is given attention. The environment has been lost. Who we are on the inside, untamed passions, unteachable temperaments. These realities are here, and they have serious consequences for the future. We must raise a generation of young people who are properly taught, with humility of heart, spirituality and God as their strength, and faith and trust in the things that are believable.
So you knew about my pivot point before the audience did, and it messes with you when you have something. When you have something that is, the world was, the doctors were telling me, shut it off. The Lord was continuing to fill me with all kinds of stuff, and there were times I thought, maybe I don't even understand. Maybe I've been making God up. This actually went through my head. Maybe I'm making God up because physically I can't do it anymore. So maybe everything that I have heard from Him in the past has been me. That's how insidious it is. If my faith hadn't been as strong as it was, I would have been lost forever. Job, to a much greater degree. Good heavens, man. Here's a good guy, hears from God, pounded relentlessly. Your book is about suffering. Why suffering? It's probably the most, I would imagine this is the entry point or exit point, if you will, for most people on God. They start to see suffering, something happens in their life, and they're like, that can't come from God. That doesn't come from God. Why suffering?
You know, this to me is the number one question. And it is such a powerful question that the anti-theists or atheists or agnostics ask, that they've actually moved it from a positioning of saying questioning the existence of God. They call it the evidential argument against God's existence. They think it is evidence contra theism, that because there is evil, it is impossible for there to be a God. Now, in this book, we have dealt with it, my colleague from Oxford, Vince Vitale, and I wish I could go into all of the arguments there and how to deal with it. But just remember, let's remember one thing. Every worldview has to deal with it. Every worldview. Atheism, skepticism, pantheism, all of the monotheistic worldviews. So let me give a simple illustration and just answer it this way. I can go into the philosophical side of it. There's a young gal in Georgia who was born with a strange malady called SIPA, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis. She cannot feel pain. A handful of people in this world are born like that. And she was being interviewed by the media, and at the end of the interview, she said something startling. She went on to say, you know, if my child steps on a nail or puts a hand on a burner or something, playing a sport, she does not know she's been cut and bleeding. We need to watch, we need to observe. And so her closing statement was, every night I go to bed saying, dear God, please allow my daughter to feel pain.
Unbelievable.
If in this physical body, pain is an indicator of something that is not right, how much more is it possible for an infinite God to demonstrate to us that pain is an indicator of something that's broken down spiritually? That's one thought. Secondly, what Chesterton said, meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. So you take the two extremes.
Wow, look at what's happening in our society too right now.
The emptiness that comes from pleasure,
yes,
and the meaninglessness that comes from pain. So there has to be an answer for both pleasure and for pain. That means only God is big enough to put the two together and explain why the pain and where to create the boundaries for pleasure. We have to get to the point of an intellectual answer that does away with the skepticism and an experiential answer that brings a closure and understanding. So there's a sophisticated philosophical side to it. There's an experiential pastoral side to it. That's what we've tried to do in the book, Glenn.
I don't want to get into politics by any stretch of the imagination, but could I just do an overview? Let's use helicopter parents, because I think in some ways all governments are starting to become helicopter parents, where, this business is in trouble, this bank is in trouble, we'll bail you out. That's the same thing as a parent that does that. To me, it feels immoral, because you are taking, my biggest gains have come right after my failures. I think what happened to me with this pivot point is so critical. If you would have taken that away, I wouldn't be on the course that I'm now finding myself on.
You're spot on. I was talking to some friends over lunch. I have a dear friend who's my literary agent, lives in Orlando, Florida. Last week he lost his wife at the age of 60 or 62. She was a beautiful woman. Bobby was her name, and Robert, the husband. Beautiful gal. 2 years ago, diagnosed with cancer. Within 2 years, she was gone. We were together last weekend. Her brother-in-law said to me, he said, Ravi, Bobby said to us, I will not trade away these 2 years for anything. I am a different person now to what I was 2 years ago. There's something when pain is completed, that Paul says, we are told, afterwards it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Or as Thornton Wilder says, in love's service, wounded soldiers serve the best. See, the journey of life can sometimes be through convoluted areas, but it brings you out to a better understanding of who you are and why it all took place in the first hand.
In times of comfort, there is little growth. In times of growth, there is little comfort.
The fact is, sometimes, look at our nation. Through the struggles and tumultuous times, we turn to God. Now in success, what Abraham Lincoln warned us about, with all of our attainments, we may think we have brought it to ourselves. If I can quote a hymn, Annie Johnston Flint, who was orphaned early, arthritic, cancerous, blind. Her biography is called Something Beautiful for God. And here's what she writes. He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength when the labors increase. To added affliction he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials his multiplied peace. When we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving has only begun. His love has no limit, his grace has no measure, his power has no boundaries known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. You've learned that, and I've learned that in our finitude, the magnanimous grace of God becomes larger, and that's when you know who to depend on.
10 points for using the word finitude. Side note, do you have a photographic memory?
You know what?
Close?
No, I don't have photographic memory. When I was younger, it was easier. These days, you begin to say, what did I do yesterday?
Right. I saw a speech that you gave, and you quoted a poem about when a man, and it spoke to me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yes.
Could you quote a little bit of this?
Okay, I think I was speaking on Nehemiah. When God wants to drill a man and thrill a man and skill a man, when God wants to mold a man to play the noblest part, when he yearns with all his heart to create so great and bold a man that all the world might be amazed, watch his methods, watch his ways, how he ruthlessly perfects whom he royally elects, how he hammers and hurts him, and with mighty blows converts him into trial shapes of clay that only God understands, while his tortured heart is crying and he lifts beseeching hands, how he bends but never breaks when his good he undertakes, how he uses whom he chooses, and with mighty acts induces him to try his splendor out. God knows what he's about.
That's why suffering, isn't it?
Exactly. Breaking and rebuilding and molding and shaping. The captain of our salvation was made perfect through suffering. God conquers not in spite of suffering, but conquers through it. When we learn that difference, we learn the beautiful weaving that he does to bring the grand design that he intends for us.
We are in a place now where life doesn't mean anything. There was the girl in Oregon, Brittany Maynard, who had cancer. And she set a date, and I'm not going to suffer beyond this. And then she killed herself. The world cheered. The world cheered. I don't want to condemn her by any stretch of the imagination. But what do you say to her? What do you say to people who say, I don't want to go through that? I was with my dad. My dad passed away a few months ago. And I said to the doctors, and this was really frightening. I said to the doctors, please, in today's age, there is no need for him to feel any pain. Please, just take away the pain. They looked at me this fast. We can't kill him. I had another friend who lost their father. That was the same thing the doctor said to him on the other side of the country. We can't kill him. Are there many people saying, hey, can you just kind of juice it up and let him go? We don't respect life at all. How do we get that back? What do we say to people who say, I want to die with dignity?
You know, Belgium has such a high rate of suicides these days that they're not calling it suicide anymore. They're calling it opting out of life.
Oh my gosh.
Opting out of life. You know, it's not a simple issue because pain is a horrible thing. Hopelessness is a horrible thing. You just lie in bed there and you're wondering where this is all going to go. It's hard to pontificate from a distance, but having been on a bed of suicide myself, Glenn, when I came to know Christ and he changed my life, I realized what a horrible act I was engaged in taking away the very gift that God had given to me of life. And what I would say to a person like that and to our culture, the reason we make those decisions at the end of this project called life in ourselves is because we have defined it wrongly at the beginning. If you wrongly define what it means to be human, then you will end up treating yourself as a quantity, not as an entity, and the quantity is done away with. Life has to be defined in its essence and at its core, and trust and faith are indispensable in all of those. The Bible says that it is given to us, every minute accorded to us was written in his book long before any one of them came to be. I cannot play God and violate the image of God in my life.
If you don't believe in God.
If you don't believe in God, that is the logical outworking. If you don't believe in God, not only is that the logical outworking for yourself, it is the logical outworking for everybody else too. When Jesus was asked to take 613 of Moses' laws, 613, Isaiah reduced it to 15, David to 11, Micah to 3, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. Jesus reduced it to 2. You know, he could have reduced it to 1. He could have comfortably reduced it to 1. He didn't. He took it to 2. To love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 hang all of the laws and the prophets. What he really was saying was, if you believe in the first, the second is the natural outcome. And if you don't believe in the first, the second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. So the outworking of love for God is the love for your fellow human being. When Jacob met up with Esau, and Esau forgave him, Jacob made an astounding statement. He said, I now see in your face the face of God. Until we have that divine encounter, we will never really know what a gift life is. It is not an ownership, it is a stewardship. And the owner will always be God.
Ravi, thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Always good to be with you, my